Good morning, everyone. Thank you guys for being so patient, giving us a few extra minutes to let everyone get all logged in. My name is Rachel Zarowin with HC3, and we're going to get started. So thank you guys so much for joining us. I see the sun is shining out my window. And despite this week of classic Summit County spring, we're really excited to talk gardening. And I hope you guys are too. So first, who's we? Like I said, I'm Rachel Zarowin. I'm the Community Programs Director at HC3. So my focus is on waste diversion, water conservation, and sustainable food. Lisa Evans, who you'll see as a panelist, she supports those programs, and she's also here to help with technical issues. I'll get to that stuff in a moment too. I have additional teammates who work on climate action, energy efficiency, and business sustainability. I recognize that the person you're really here to listen to is Kyla LaPlante. Love the perfect last name. I saw somebody commenting on that in the chat. She's the magic behind the Summit CSA, which is our farm share. That means that people buy a share of the farm, and each week Kyla and her team produce 77 shares of incredible organic produce, all grown right here in Summit County. So if there's anybody to talk to you about gardening and planning, it's Kyla. I'll talk more about HC3 here in a second, but first I wanted to give a shout out to Summit County Library. They're our partner in this workshop. So you also see Sarah, she's a panelist as well. So if you have library questions, feel free to chat with her. All three library locations are offering appointments for in-person visits now, and they're still offering curbside pickup. So they have a ton of free digital resources, which I personally use all the time and love it. So that includes ebooks, videos, newspapers, and more. The library is also offering some fabulous virtual programming for different ages. I mean, it's everything from trivia nights to take and make crafts. So visit summitcountylibraries.org. Follow them on Facebook or sign up for their newsletter, which you can do on the website. And if you don't have a library card yet, it's time to get one. And you can apply for one online. So we'll throw that link in the chat too. And you can find it in the FAQs on the library's website. So I'm going to take it back to HC3. Our work is focused locally right here in Summit County. We've been active in the community for more than 40 years, and we help residents and businesses curb climate change and reduce waste. So in the summertime, you'll see me, you'll see Lisa, and a bunch of staff and volunteers at the recycling centers, helping people understand what's accepted in those recycling bins. And for those of you who are familiar with the site, you may have seen the free food scrap recycling bins. So that's a free program to drop off your food scraps, and those get turned into compost, soil for your garden. That composting process happens right here in Summit County at the scrap or the landfill. We'll send out some details on how to sign up for that food scrap recycling program and where to pick up some of that high quality compost, because you can do that any time of year. Beyond our work in recycling and climate action, we help folks conserve water and energy. So check out highcountryconservation.org. We have a free energy audit promotion that's going on right now throughout the month of April. And we also have a program called Solarize Summit, and we can help you get started with rooftop solar. So on top of all those things, because it's a lot, Kyla keeps us focused on sustainable food. So as an example, the organic spinach that you find in the grocery store, that's from California. It travels about 1,200 miles to get here in Summit County, but experienced gardeners know that you can crush the spinach in Summit County. And that's what Kyla is going to cover with you today, is how to grow successfully in Summit County. Again, visit us on Facebook or highcountryconservation.org and check out all the ways that you can commit to conservation right here in our community. I know you guys are ready for Kyla, and I've got just a couple more housekeeping things. So if we lose connection, we're of course going to try to get it back. And if we can't, we'll get materials posted on our website. If you have any technical issues, click on the chat and chat with panelists. Send us a message and we'll try to help you out. Today, Kyla is going to address 4 different elements of the planning your space. And we'll break for some questions in between. So at the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A icon. Click on that to submit any questions that you may have. And we're going to do our best to answer the most relevant questions live in the webinar. So again, thank you guys so much for tuning in this morning, and a huge thanks to all our supporters who make workshops like this possible. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Kyla.
Hey everyone, you can hear me? Welcome and thanks for joining. I'm going to hop right in because we have a lot to cover. Might fly through a few sections and spend a little more time on other sections, but like Rachel said, feel free to jump in and ask questions. This is an all levels gardening workshop, so we'll cover some basics, we'll cover some more advanced things, and yeah, we'll get started. So let's see here. So yeah, we're focusing on getting the most out of your high altitude garden. We're going to start with variety selection and then move through planting the garden or designing the garden, cultivating, and then succession planting, which people are always really curious about. So to start with, variety selection is huge here. Where we live, I see a lot of people struggle because they're selecting things that grow well in Florida or California. So the first step is to focus on what you want to grow. So become familiar with your space. Do you have a lot of room? Is it small? Where's the light coming from? Is it in the shade? Are you in a greenhouse? Is it easy to get to? Stuff like that. The ease of watering and how often you're going to be able to tend to it. And, you know, if you're going to get annoyed with it mid-season. Identify the goals for your garden. So everyone's got different goals. Some people want to just be able to get a seed to germinate here. Some people are a little more advanced. They want to do succession planting. They want to get more out of their garden. Just to kind of identify what you want for your garden. You know, it can be experimental, and that's fine. Experiment with different types of crops. You might not get as much out of it. So I think that's really important for the CSA. You know, we focus on uniform maturity because we have to have a lot of food ready all at once. Flavor is in our top 3 things for selecting varieties because that's what we're doing. We're making food that tastes better than what's in the grocery store. And then reliability and the staples and, you know, popularity. So we have identified certain goals that we select our crops according to. And then just accept your limitations. There's a lot up here, but there's also a lot of things you can do, and be realistic with your abilities. You know, everyone likes a challenge. We're in a drought. Do you really want to, you know, spend hundreds of gallons of water to get 3 cherry tomatoes or 1 head of broccoli? So just kind of ask yourself, you know, what's real for you. So just to get started with, we've got seed companies. The ones on the right are Colorado seed companies. I put the links there. This will be available afterward. I'm not going to get too much into it. High Desert Seed, they're developing seeds in Montrose. She's doing a really great job for things like peppers. If you're interested in doing something like that, if you have a greenhouse, we're not, again, going to get into that. And then the ones I put on the left, Johnny Seeds and High Mowing are really great starting points because they have so much information and they have tons of helpful hints and growers libraries. High Mowing is a no-brainer. If you want organic, all of their seeds are organic, so you don't have to worry about, you know, what your seed is or where it's coming from. Row 7's really fun. They just have, they're focused strictly on flavor, and they're developing varieties with chefs to focus on flavor and bring that back to growing. And then Baker Creek has a lot of heirlooms, a lot of fun and different things. There's not a ton of information that is always like helpful for our region, but it's fun to check out and just to see what they have. So, so plant these. Look how many you have to choose from. You know, everyone thinks we're so limited here, but we have more cool season vegetables to choose from than we do warm season vegetables. Take a look at that. The photos are helpful. These are all things that do pretty well here. Avoid these unless you're in a greenhouse. You're super advanced. I mean, think about how cheap all of these are in the greenhouse, in the grocery store. Most of these are super cheap. So why do you want to grow them? I mean, that's another thing about being realistic. You know, they might be fun to grow, but again, if you're looking for production and you want to get more of your garden, grow your basil inside. You know, treat it as a house plant. It likes it in there. It's not going to really like it outside in Breckenridge. So that's just, again, limitations. This is just an example of what it means to grow cukes and squash under row cover. This is what we do at the CSA. We cover and uncover this every single day. We've built and created this massive TP for cucumbers. As you can see them, they're thriving, but it takes a lot of work. And just, again, do you want to put that much work into it for a few items that might not thrive? If you're at that level and you have a greenhouse, great. But for those of you that are just doing outdoor gardens, these things are really hard to cover and you have to be on it every single day. So that's just a little example of that. Keywords to look for when you're selecting vegetables. We've got early season. That's what we are. We have a really short season, early maturing, widely adapted, adaptable, and hardy. Those are all good words to read about when you're selecting your seeds. They all come with a description. Just take a minute to read it. I've learned the most just by reading seed packets and by reading, descriptions and information that they share with you on seed company websites. Germinates well in cool soils. There's a lot of vegetables that do better in cool soils than others. So like dark seeds, for example, they thrive in cool soils in general. So that's just another keyword. Holds well under heat stress, stress tolerant, and good bolt tolerance. So something that we struggle with and that's really challenging here is that our temps can get up to 80 in the daytime with a really strong sun and drop super low in the evening and get really cold. And, so the average temp is comfortable for vegetables, but that strong sun can create a lot of heat stress on certain crops like radishes and arugula, even broccoli we struggle with in the greenhouse. So these are things to keep in mind as well. If a crop has good bolt tolerance, it's going to last longer throughout the season. If it's more stress tolerant, think of how stressful our climate can be here. Plants are like people. It's, look for things that are going to make your life a little easier. Compact habit, reliable producer, and high yielding. So again, if you've got a 4x6 garden, or if you're a community gardener and you have a small space, if you see something that says high yielding, like that's like a pick me kind of wording on it. So, oops, sorry. Compact habit, if you're interested in trying squash, if you have a greenhouse again, or if you're growing broccoli or cabbage or crops that are bigger, these are not things I recommend for a small space, but that's a word you can look for, which means it's going to be a smaller plant and still productive in the smaller space. So that's what we look for personally for squash that we grow in the greenhouse. Best flavor, AASS winner. That kind of speaks for itself. The All-America selection, that's what AAS winner means. That's kind of like an easy one to pick. They usually have the little symbol right next to it. And that can help you decide easily what to choose, sorry. And then days to maturity, we'll get into in a second. That's pretty important, again, with our climate. The shorter, the better. And then something to be aware of is vigorous plants. I used to think meant that they do really well as far as production goes, but what I've learned is that vigorous plants can often mean that they're really big and they tend to take over. So just kind of heed that. They just produce a lot of foliage, like with carrots. If it says vigorous tops, it means you're going to have a lot of lush green tops, which isn't necessarily bad, but can take up more room and prevent airflow. So kind of depending on, again, what you're looking for. Another thing to look out for is non-uniform immaturity. So if you want something to be harvestable over a long time, non-uniform maturity might be something that you're looking for, because it means that the crop will mature over an extended period of time. For my growing goals, I kind of need that to be more uniform, but some people might need it to be less uniform. So just kind of get to know what you're growing, read about it and know what you're putting in the ground, because there's a lot of differences. So days to maturity, we've got the average. So I'm sure all of you have seen this. What does it mean? It means from germination. So There's a handout here that we'll show in just a second that has a really good guide to how long it takes something to germinate. But so carrots, for example, generally take 2 weeks to germinate. So that's going to be added to their days to maturity. For example, if a carrot is 60 days to maturity, you have to add 14 days to that germination time. If it's a transplanted crop, it's the average number of days from transplant. So that's not going to include the 5 weeks that you were growing it inside your house. So keep that in mind. And then as far as if you're not sure if it's counting from direct seed or transplant, just turn the seed packet over or explore the description of the vegetable more, and it will tell you if the seeding date is taken from transplant or from direct seed. For flowers and herbs, that's typically calculated from the germination date. So just to round that up, choose varieties that are less than 70 to 80 days to maturity, because again, those typically, if you have an 80-day carrot, you're like, great, I can do that. And then it takes 2 weeks to germinate and it turns into 94 days. And you're like, it just spent 3 weeks in my garden for 3 carrots. So, you can choose a carrot variety that is a 60-day to maturity, and that's a little bit better for our zone. So to round it, so for productive outdoor gardens at 9,000 feet, if you're seeing vegetables that are over 75 to 80 days to maturity, they're generally gonna crush your dreams, of having this lush and wonderful garden. It just takes too long, and our temps are too tight, and our season is too short to really mess around with that. If you're in the experimental phase, great, go for it and see how that works for you. But if you really want to get the most out of your garden, then kind of stick to that amount of time. So again, with that, accept limitations. So broccoli. So this is just an example of how to calculate days to maturity. Going to go through this kind of quick because I just went through it. So you read about this crop, it sounds great. Stress tolerant, strong for summer and fall harvest. You've got 65 days to maturity. I added on this little equation that says plus 35 days. So I'm going to try to not be too confusing here, but if you scroll down, so this is from Johnny Seed's website. They have a ton of information, like I said before. You can click on the growing information box and it will tell you right here from date of transplanting. So that's 65 days from your transplant date. So you're going to add the 35 days that it's spent in your house. So that's actually 100 days to maturity. That's a decent amount of time for a crop. If you want to direct seed it and you don't have the capacity to grow it inside and do it as a start, then you're going to add 20 days if direct seeding. So you take that 65 days to maturity, as you look down here where I calculated it, you add 7 days, give or take, for germination. That's in a perfect world. That might take longer. Plus 20 days, as they mentioned, to add 20 days if you're direct seeding the crop. That's putting you at 92 days. So if you start it May 17th and you add a week, that's 7 days. So that brings you to germination date of May 24th. And you add 12 weeks, which is that 65 days plus your 20 days. So 85 days is about 12 weeks. Then your harvest date is going to be August 16th. So that's how you calculate that. And that's just how to put it into perspective, that you have to read a little more than, what just meets the eye sometimes. And if you have questions, just let me know about that. And then conversely, typically I direct seed beets. They can be started inside. This baby beet is nice because it's a little bit quicker than your average beets, about 10 days quicker, 15, maybe 2 weeks. So again, down to the growing information, this says from direct seeding. It says if you start it inside, subtract 14 to 21 days if you're transplanting. So the average age to transplant beets at is around 4 to 5 weeks, similar to broccoli. So to calculate this, if you've got these beets growing in your house for 5 weeks. That's 35 days. And then they've told you that it's 40 days to maturity from direct seeding. So you want to subtract 15 days, which is, it says subtract 14 to 21 days. So just, take an average of that. So let's say that's an average of 25 days to maturity. That's in the garden. So from transplant. So again, that's bringing you to 60 days to maturity if you want to start those beets inside. And I'm only pointing this out because so many people are so eager to start everything inside. And it's good, and you can get a jump on the season, but the reality is, do you have room to grow all the beets in your house? And it's still going to take, 60 days for you to be caring for this crop. So, again, maybe to clarify, as an inside start date, you say, I really want to start beets inside. I want to get a jump on the season. Let's say you start at April 16, 2 days from now. Inside, you might be able to get it to germinate like in 4 to 5 days because it's warmer and you can pay more attention to it. So that takes you to April 20th as a germination date. So then you add 4 weeks for the amount of time you're going to have it in your house. So maybe it's going to be 5 weeks. So that takes you to May 18 where you can transplant it. And then you add another 4 weeks. So that's that 25 days where we had taken the 40 days to maturity minus the 15 days as a transplant. And that's bringing you to a June 15th harvest, which is pretty good for our season. But that's just giving you a look at how to calculate that. So I'm going to move on from that. Another part about selecting varieties is just pay attention to what it is. So for carrots, for example, people really struggle with carrots. They're grouped into slots, and it'll tell you if it's an early season crop, a main season crop, or a storage crop. Most of us don't need storage crops unless you have like a huge garden. There's no need to do that. So pay attention to the days to maturity on that. Pay attention to the type of vegetable it is. These little chantenets are cute, but they're not that big. So if you're like, why are my carrots so small? Well, maybe you're growing the wrong type, and maybe you're not. It is hard to grow carrots here, but that's just to say, take a closer look. The same for potato varieties. It's a potato. It's not really true because if you're going for, a late season potato, those often mature in 100+ days. If you select an early season potato, then you're looking at 60 to 80 days. That's huge amount of time for us. We don't have that much time. And again, anytime you can notice it, always select the early season types. So that should clarify some of that.
Thanks, Kyla. So we have a bunch of great questions in the Q&A. So we're going to fire away with some of those. So we have a CSA question, wondering when will the CSA start direct season? And the second part is, do you heat the CSA, the covered greenhouses?
So we start planting the CSA the first week of May. We'll be getting the beds prepped here coming up after this presentation. And no, we don't heat the greenhouses. Everything is passive. So everything, that picture that you saw of us covering, we do everything with row cover, and we do double covering and extra covering. So it's kind of like putting layers on when you're dressing to go outside. We've got the greenhouse, and then we cover with row cover inside. And then our outside beds are all covered by a caterpillar tunnel, which we have, we can talk about more later. But sometimes we call ourselves the undercover CSA because everything is undercover, but not heated.
Awesome. And then, so this is a good question that I think might be able to help a lot of people is could you name some of the top 5 most successful vegetables in Summit County?
Sure, and we are going to get into that a little more closely, but I think the things that you can thrive with are radishes, salad turnips, leafy greens, so lettuce, spinach, arugula, any of those like leafy greens that you can cut and come again. And I mean, peas do really well here. Peas and herbs you can really do well with. So. And again, we'll get in a little bit more closer detail to some of those too. So.
Awesome. And then this is a question that we had about direct seeding in the fall versus the springtime. Is that something that you can speak to, Kyla, or is this?
Yep. And we are again going to get a little closer into detail. But you'll want to start planning your succession seeding. So your fall direct seeding a little earlier. The last date is August 15. That's what I go by. Your last direct seeding date, and that would be for things like radishes and arugula, the fastest crops. So because after which point, when the days start to get shorter, that really determines the growth rate of the crop. And so anything really after that, if you're not growing in a greenhouse or if you're not covering it, it's going to be kind of a loss because you won't really get a harvest. The growth slows significantly. And I have an example of that coming up in a little bit. So.
And then we have a couple more questions. Some of this might come up later, but when's a good time to plant garlic in the fall? When in the fall?
So garlic, I do usually the first week of October, last week of September.
Awesome, thanks. And then let's see, another question. And I realize you're going to get into some of the transplanting stuff later, but a question about is buying little plants at local garden shops. Is that a good idea? Or do you have thoughts on that?
It is a good idea. I struggle with this because we don't have a lot of garden centers. Alpine's a great one. I would beware of pests on places like Lowe's or City Market or stuff like that. I mean, I think in general, they're okay. My challenge with buying plants from places like Lowe's or just big, like Walmart or something like that, is they're not region specific. So they come from, wherever they come from. Sometimes they come from Denver, but that's still not very region specific. And so I think, if you're going to do tomatoes, if you're shooting for the stars and you want to do all those warm season crops and you're like, these look great, you have to pay attention to what you're selecting is the most important thing.
Awesome. Thanks, Kyla. So we're gonna jump into the next question. Jump into the next section. I know we have a couple more questions in the Q&A, and I do think some of those will get answered as Kyla keeps going. So thanks, Kyla.
All right. So designing the garden. This is another thing that's always fun, but can be challenging. I like the picture in this this little cartoon because it actually shows a lot of what we can do with Summit County Garden. And a lot of you, I'm sure, are community gardeners or have just, a small plot in your house. So I always start with peas if you're going to grow peas. If your bed is like 32 inches wide, so just less than 3 feet wide, you can plant a double row on the north edge. So like you see the peas in this picture, that works well for beds under 3 feet wide. Anything over that, it's getting really hard to harvest. So if your bed, think about your reach. With our 4-foot beds, I have to put the peas in the middle of the bed. So we do a double row in the dead center of the bed and then plant smaller things like greens and radishes on either side of the peas. You always want to be aware of where you put them because of shading. So put them on the north edge. They're tall crops. You can put those on the north edge. If you're going to do stuff like full-size Swiss chard or full-size kale, I would do that next in. So you kind of want to, that's how you want to start with like how you're going to lay your garden out. Keep ease of harvesting in mind. So again, that whole pea example, if you're going to be harvesting lettuce, every week, put those closer to the front of the bed where you're going to be, where it's easy to harvest, as opposed to like, let's say carrots, where you could put those closer to the peas. They're further away. They're going to take longer to mature and they're going to be like a one and done kind of harvest. So you can kind of, you want to make your garden work for you, really. I like that they have the chives in the corners. Those are good vole deterrents. And then when they flower, they're good, they attract pollinators. So you really only need one, max of 2 chive plants, depending on your capacity to eat chives. But once that plant comes back the following year, you're going to have more than enough to feed yourself on one plant, or, to your family even. Are you going to use season extension? That's a big one. If you're going to use season extension and you're going to trellis peas, how are you going to cover the other crops around them? You know, keep that in mind. And is it realistic for you to come and cover and uncover your bed every day? And then the biggest thing that you want to keep in mind is space. I think that we have a tendency as humans to want to cram as much as we can into the small space to get as much out of it as we can. And I see that a lot, and I'm still learning even with that. And I'll just give you an example of, I was spacing my basil plants at 6-inch spacing for years, and I took a big leap of faith this year, and I trusted all the things I'd learned and read, and I doubled the spacing. So I used to do 6 inches between each basil plant. I increased it to 12 inches between plants, and I doubled production. So I've been learning that as we go. Sometimes you read something and it's not quite on par with the garden. So, and you'll read something the next year and you'll learn something new. So just pay attention to what's going on. I have, let's see here. There's a spacing guide I'm going to share with you from Denver Urban Gardens that's really helpful. We'll get to that in a second. The way I've set this up is, so R is rows, R foot is row feet, direct seed is DS, oops, sorry. Plants per row, PPR. So you can kind of look at this. We'll make this available again, but let's just look at carrots, for example. So in this, if you look at the bottom, I've kind of sectioned out the whole length of the bed. So this is a 6 by 3 foot bed. So I've started with peas. There's a double row of peas. You don't have to thin them. They're 1-inch spacing. They're going to be right up at the edge of the north end of the garden. So then I've put carrots and beets on the right side. They're kind of the two crops that we're not going to be replanting a lot of. Carrots are probably going to live in the garden the whole season. The way that I plant this is one planting I can get 2 successions out of, and without getting too complicated, you can plant a carrot that matures in 60 days, and then you can plant another variety that matures in 70 days, and that can give you 2 plantings. And I have a closer look at that in a minute, but that's one way to succession plant with carrots that can take you through a whole season. So then when you're thinking about spacing, I've got 6 rows of carrots going across this 12-inch space at 2-inch spacing. So if you just do the math, that gives you 12 inches. And then the length that we have left, so the orange block of carrots, this isn't all to scale or whatever, but I've got at 2 feet, since we're giving peas a 1-foot section, you've got a 2-foot length to plant your carrots in. So if you take 24 inches divided by 2, you'll get 12 plants going the length of it. So just the way that I like to, just to start with, and this is how I started. I used to literally count the amount of carrots I was planting in one space. So you can take that 6 rows times 12 plants per row, and that's going to give you 72 carrots over the course of the season. And I'm sure there might be questions about that, but that's kind of how that's broken down. You can do that with root crops. I think that's helpful to just give you an idea of how much you want to plant. Say, I love beets. I would love to have 72 beets. Then you can just do the math with the spacing, the same way I just did that. And so I've done here, I gave room for 2 rows of beets in this 2-foot space, the purple block, and that gives you 2 rows times 7 plants per row. That's 14 beets. And so you can move through the bed that way in planning. And that might sound confusing, but I feel like this is kind of a helpful way to look at it. And then in the middle here, as you move over, I've got the rows going laterally as opposed to vertically. So I've got a baby kale row going across since I had more length there. And the same with bok choy and spinach. So you can see how you can manipulate the garden how you want it to be. I put the radishes on the end because these are going to be something that once you harvest, You'll be done harvesting in like 3 weeks, and you can get another planting out of it. So once this patch is gone, you can reseed it in the fall and get one more crop before the season's over. So I put that on an easily accessible spot where you can get in, reset the soil, and replant pretty easily. So as opposed to being in the middle where you have to reach over everything, that's kind of how I designed that. So we'll have that available. You can take a closer look. I'm going to keep moving on. So whatever you've got for a space, you can just make it work for you. A lot of people like to lay it out physically to do a square foot gardening bed. So you can do that to help you figure out the spacing. And that can be helpful for first-time gardeners. You've got a trellis right here. You can do peas on it if you want to get crazy and you don't care about production. You say, I'm going to grow this cucumber. You can trellis cucumbers on that. You might want to figure out how to cover it. But if you have a space that's got a lot of round planters, it doesn't really matter what you have going as long as you're keeping the same spacing. And so if you have small round pots, like this one I've got potatoes in, figure out the diameter of that. If that's a 12-inch pot, put one potato in it. If it's an 18-inch pot, maybe you want to try broccoli, you know, you only get one broccoli out of it, but these types of beds are a little easier to cover, and you can kind of, you know, plant them as you will, as long as you maintain the same spacing. The same with this space. This is the one in the upper right-hand corner is what we have, a new bed in Dillon Valley, and we just made it work for us. So the way I space that is that I continue to measure the bed as it wanes out, and I just put the correct amount of spacing. So to get into spacing, what is the spacing? No matter what your layout, spacing's key. Keep a little measuring tape with you, you know, in the beginning to get an idea of what everything looks like. This chart is super helpful. We'll share this with you. All the spacing on here is great. It is, I think, pretty spot on. And I think you can use this as a great guide to start with. So without getting in any more into it, they also give you the average germination date. And this is a great chart that we'll have a link for you guys in the chat. Estimated yield. This is getting a little more into it, but this is another thing I've created to share, the average pounds per row feet. This is based on 4 years of data that we've taken at the CSA. It's a good starting point. So if you look at that sample layout that I shared with you, the carrots, again, for example, we had 6 rows by 2 feet. So that's 12 row feet. The formula in here makes 12 row feet multiplied by 0.3 pounds per row feet. And that should give you the average projected yield. You can look at this more closely, but again, for interests of time, we've got all of the starting point, all of these average pounds per row feet in a spreadsheet that we'll make available. And as a guide, when you look at this, the 0.31 pounds at the bottom there equals 5 ounces. That's the standard clamshell for greens. So if you're buying, you know, lettuce or spinach or arugula in the store, those small containers are 5 ounces, and that's 0.31 pounds of greens. So I put in, as an example, again, just with the sample layout that I gave, around that amount of yield that you can anticipate from those greens in your garden. So I know this is a little more advanced, but it can eventually be helpful, I think, for some of you in planning your garden. So I think that brings us to the next step.
Yeah, so we got a couple of questions here. Another good one that I think is going to be great for other people to hear too. So any examples of things that we can direct sow before the last frost? This person mentions that they've done peas before the last frost. So what recommendations do you have?
I'm sorry, say that again?
Anything that you can direct sow before the last frost.
Yeah, so, you know, that
And I think they mean in the springtime, because they mentioned that they don't usually direct sow until mid-June, and have only done peas before mid-June.
So that largely depends. Grab yourself a soil thermometer. And I'm just going to kind of move into this next thing. Everyone can still see. Yeah. You can, as long as your soil temperature is at the optimum range for seeding, so things like peas, carrots, lettuces, they can all be direct sown around 40 degrees. So if you look again at this guide, they've got soil temp for germination throughout here. And then it's largely based on the soil temperature. So peas do great at soil temp. If you plant peas the first week of May and it snows every day in May, your seeds might rot out. That's the challenge we face.
Awesome. Thanks. Let's see. So then another question, do steel watering troughs get too hot for cool season plants in summer? So as a planter, a steel watering trough, what are your thoughts on that?
My first answer would be, I don't think so, because the soil, I think, would be a good insulating layer. And I think it's really based on soil temp. And honestly, as much as those troughs can help heat the soil throughout the day, that I think that would help a lot to carry throughout the evening. So it's kind of like an overall ambient temperature of the soil that can be helpful for your plants. So I would say, I don't think they can get too hot unless, you know, it feels like they're scalding. Take again, the soil thermometer, see how hot the temperature of the soil is, because that can get super high in the heat of the summer. And it can affect germination of cooler seasons crops like carrots and spinach. But as far as a warm season crop, they should be able to take it as long as it's wet, as long as you're keeping it watered.
Awesome. And then thanks, Kyla. Another question we have is, how much germination time should you add in for sowing in the ground versus in a raised bed?
Again, that's not just like, it's going to be based on your soil temp. So that's kind of a good thing. I don't do a lot of in-ground specific. All of ours are raised beds. But the way that I figure out what's going on with my germination time is, so I'm just going to show you this real quick. This germination guide, this is with every crop at Johnny Seeds, which is why I like this website. If you're unsure about if a crop's going to germ or not, they've got this with anything you click on. So if you look at this guide and you see, I've got, you know, 48 degrees is where it starts to germ. That's going to be the slowest amount of time it takes to germinate, up to 77. So if your soil temp, and this is kind of like an average temperature of the whole day, but if your soil temp is an average of 77, that's going to be optimum. You know, your stuff's going to be germinating within 5 to 7 days on the dot. And some crops like spinach, if your soil temp is consistently too hot, which can happen in a greenhouse situation, then they're not going to germ, or it's going to be erratic and crappy. So this is really good if you're at the level of, you know, just the soil thermometers can really help you with that. And that might sound nerdy, but it's a really handy thing to carry around. You can use your meat thermometer. And then these guides are super helpful to see how soil temperature affects germination rate.
I love the meat thermometer tip. That's fantastic. So we do have another question since we have time here. So this is a question about compost and about amending beds at the beginning of the season. How much of your old soil should you stir up with new compost before the beginning of each season? Is that compost amendment required and or beneficial?
I think compost is the best, cheapest thing you can add to your soil each year. You know, our beds have been high in organic matter. That's AKA compost, more or less. But time and again, what we're reading is that this is the best thing you can do to add basic, simple nutrients and feed your soil. As far as stirring up the bed, you don't want to get in super deep. Really what you're aiming for is the first couple of inches. The reason for that is you want to envision your whole soil bed as a big community. It's a community of microbes that are all in certain layers at the spots where they like to be and where they're most beneficial. So the whole idea of tilling the garden, which we're moving further and further away from, is so that we're not disturbing those soil layers. So you can just kind of rake that compost in the first, I'd say 2 to 4 inches, and just level it out. We usually add about a 1/2 inch of compost for the length of the bed. I guess a way to break that down, I don't have that thing, but typically, you know, 1 to 2 5-gallon buckets, depending on your bed. Maybe not even that. It's really helpful to take a soil test, but without, again, overcomplicating it. Yes, it's helpful to add compost. I'd recommend it at the start of every season, about a 1/2 inch layer, 1/4 inch to a 1/2 inch layer on your bed, tilled in like 2 to 4 inches.
Awesome. Thanks, Kyla. If you guys have more questions, go ahead and drop them into the question and answer feature. Let's see, we have one more question here that I think we have time for. What about using worm castings, as compost? Any thoughts on that?
I think time and again, that's been proven as a really rich source. You might get away with doing a little bit less worm castings. So maybe like a 1/4 inch layer, and see how it does. But yeah, I think that worm castings are great.
Awesome. Thanks. We'll let you take it away with cultivation. Again, keep dropping those questions into the Q&A box and we'll get to the most relevant ones. Thanks, guys.
All right, so we've dipped into germination. So back to the start of this, germination, thinning, and bolting. These are like 3 garden stages that can really make or break how productive you can be. Germination is hard here. It's harder than people give it credit for because it's so dry. We don't have the humidity of being on the East Coast. We don't have the humidity of being in the South. Humidity is huge, and I'm learning more and more about that every year, but keeping those beds moist and preventing them from crusting over, that I kind of feel is the biggest challenge that people have with carrots, for example, or even like with lettuce. I know lettuce is really easy to grow. It's easier than carrots. However, you might have a hard time getting it to germ. So planting depth is a really important guide. And I'm coming back to carrots because, again, it's something I get so many questions on. You can use your knuckles or your fingers, I'm going to skip to this, to help you figure out how deep to plant things, how wide to thin things. If you're in the garden, you're like, oh crap, I don't have a measuring tape. It's good to know the length of your finger. So my first knuckle is about 1 inch. So when I'm planting peas, I can go through the bed and make a row that's as deep as my first knuckle and know that that's 1 inch deep. And that's the appropriate depth for planting peas. So you can do that throughout the garden. And I've actually literally measured my fingers so that I know exactly what my spacing is. So with the handprint there, 2 inches for 4 fingers. So that's helpful when you're thinning, and 1 inch for the 2-finger mark. Again, helpful when you're thinning or planting. So that's a really good trick that I learned. I want to say I learned that from Sherry with Alpine, like way back when I first started, and I've used it ever since. So that's handy. And then your soil must be kept moist. If you're not going to be around, if you're on vacation, if you've got a community garden, you can't get there every day, cover it. Row cover is something that I'm trying to make people understand is super important here and going to help be really successful. If we have more questions, we might even, I can direct you to where to get row cover, and I can get you some more in-depth detail about row cover. But it's super helpful with germination, especially that question about planting early. I've been able to plant early because we cover all of our beds to improve the germination rate, and it really makes a difference. Another important thing, know your dates. Write down when you plant it and when you expect it to come out. I mean, we've all got phones, use your phone calendar. Set a little alarm if you feel like you're going to forget. But if you've got, again, those carrots in the ground or the peas even, and they're not coming out within 2 weeks, then take a look, dig in the soil and see what's going on. Sometimes those pea seeds will have rotted. If you went too early and it was too cold, if they've rotted, just pull them out and replant them. That's the best thing I can say to that. Don't just hope that they're going to come up, because they won't. Maybe they will, but maybe it'll be like way late in the season, and you have better luck if you pay attention to that and you tend to it quicker than later. So again, this in these pictures, you can see we have perforated plastic. That's been super helpful to increase germination early season. You have to be careful if it's a hot season like it was last year. You can burn the crofts if you're not paying attention, the little babies as they're coming up. And the more forgiving thing is that cloth fabric that you see coming out of that bag, that's row cover. And that does the same thing. It's like a blanket for your bed. Thinning is a challenge, even when it's being explained to you in the garden. I've seen it with many people that I've worked with. Again, I can't stress enough, like bring a ruler or get to know your finger spacing. Thinning is so important, because if you're not thinning your bed, if you're like, oh my God, this looks so beautiful, all of my carrots came up. Oh, womp womp, I didn't thin my bed. Why are my carrots smaller than the size of a pencil? Because you didn't thin, they didn't have enough room. And that can be an easy mistake with carrots. That can be an easy mistake with radishes. That can be, I feel like that hinders a lot of gardens. So you can see how in these pictures, what they look like. If only one plant has emerged in one station, leave 3 on one side and 2 in the other. Basically, what this is telling you is that no matter how your seeds germinate, they're trying to leave the same amount of space around each plant. So you can kind of see that in this picture. And if everything comes up uniformly, then you'll want to remove the weakest plants. So you're playing God, but don't be scared. Don't feel bad. You're not going to kill your garden. In some instances, if your plants get really big, you can just cut them instead of plucking them. But thinning is enabling heavier yields. So thin your way to heavier yields. This step can't be skipped, and I can't stress it enough. And sometimes, and again, I'm bringing up carrots, but you have to do it more than once. I've seen in our beds of carrots get, hours of thinning, and then a week later, you're like, wow, it doesn't even look like it got thin. So sometimes it needs to be thinned again. So just keep that in mind. And you can eat your thinnings. So not all is lost. If you let them get a little bigger, you can eat those little radish thinnings. You can throw them in a salad. You can eat your little Swiss chard thinnings. So you can eat that. So if you feel bad about throwing it away, that's how you can repurpose them. So envision your roots growing under the ground. This is how I work. This is how I picture my whole garden. And this is how I picture my thinning. So if you're having a hard time grasping that concept, I mean, you could take a radish from your fridge, put it in the ground and be like, oh, this is how much space it needs to grow out of the soil. That's what it's going to need underground. So if you're not thinning, you can see in this small space, they're super close together. There's not enough room for them to grow. I don't love that second picture because there is room for them to grow on the inside edge, but you can kind of get the idea with that. So for all your root vegetables, it's a really easy way to envision, how big do you want your beets to grow? How big do you want your radishes to grow? This is a good guide. And again, that Doug handout has that good the information to spacing. So I would just keep that handy if you're ever in a pinch. The finger guide's helpful. So let's move on to bolting. Don't get bullied by bolting. I feel like everyone gets really bullied and intimidated by when their plants go to seed. They don't know what's going on. Their garden's going crazy. Something's wrong. All's lost. I can't grow a garden. So just become familiar with what bolting is. So basically, it's just the process during which a plant goes to seed. Your harvest can be lost if the plants bolt prematurely. So bolting is caused by extreme climate conditions. This is typically high heat for things like radishes and arugula, and it can also be instigated by extreme cold. So for those of you getting the itch to want to plant super early, kind of keep an eye on the season. This happened to me in May of 2019. I don't know if you all remember, this is how the garden looked until the beginning of June. I planted everything according to my same seeding dates. We did do extra measures to get the soil warm with row cover. But what ended up happening is our entire patch of bok choy germinated, but by the time it started growing, the whole patch bolted. And I'd never seen that happen before. It was a uniform thing. They all went to seed, and I was like, what the hell? Like, what caused that? And it took me almost until a year later to figure out that it was because it was too cold for too long and too much and not enough light. And it caused the whole patch to bolt. So the same way that sun can do that, and because our sun is so strong, that's typically the cause. But in a season like this, if you're like, oh, I'm going to really do it and get a start, beware that that can happen. Conversely, like that can happen with carrots, that can happen with bok choy. So just to kind of give you an idea of that. So just some quick pictures. Radishes and arugula, even like your broccoli rabe will look like this when it's going to seed. They're all in the same family. When this happens, it's time to pull the plants. Like unless you're wanting to eat the seed pods, which is not typical, don't let it get this far along. Like if your goal is production. A bolted radish, this happens pretty easily. If your radishes bolt, take a bite. So you can see this stalk here. It's a thick stalk. It's really tall. That's the flowering stalk. The plant wants to flower. It's done with its life. It's setting. It's having babies. It's done with its own, producing roots and greens that you can eat. So if this starts to happen, and especially with radishes, if you start to notice this really thick, again, like on the right side, that's the stalk becomes really thick and tough. And obviously you can see that that's not like something you want to eat. Sometimes it's hard to tell, but just give it a taste. And if it becomes pithy, which is like kind of starchy and tough to bite on, then they're starting to bolt, and that's, you're not going to get anything else out of them. So just pull them. And this is your lettuce bolting. That's what it looks like when it starts to go to seed. So it's not becoming this amazing tree. I mean, it could, but unless you're saving seed, which in our climate and with the average size bed in our community, it's just not really worth saving, things like lettuce seed. And not to discourage seed saving, but again, we're focusing on production, so of vegetables. So broccoli, this is what broccoli looks like when it's starting to bolt. The heads get really loose. They start to get little yellow flowers. They start to want to flower. So that's what it looks like if your broccoli's bolting. That can tend to happen if you're doing it in a greenhouse. If it's too hot, that we have a problem with that. So I select broccoli varieties that are bolt tolerant. And I keep an eye, and I try to keep them, in the shadier spots of the garden, because that can happen pretty easily in a warm season like last year. This is what it looks like when spinach bolts. Again, it'll keep producing, but it'll produce so little that you have time to replant it. And especially here, like the spinach will definitely probably go to seed at least once. And if it starts to bolt, I'd say harvest as much as you can off that last bit of bolting plant. I usually try to milk it like another week or two, but it's better to just pull it and save time and plant another round so you can harvest it into the fall, where it will be less likely to bolt and you'll be getting more off of it through the end of the fall. So again, don't be scared to pull what's gone and plant more. The fruits of your labor, it's an evolving garden. And I see people get so excited about, if something finally grew, but once it's overgrown, just be done with it. Just be done, pull it out and see if you can get another round with it. And I think that's hard to do. I think, that's hard for everyone to do, especially in this climate, but the braver you get, the more you'll get out of your garden, I think. So,
Thanks, Kyla. I think if there's one piece of advice that I'm going to take away from today, it's going to be to be brave. I love it. I love it. So we do have a couple questions come through. This one is about seeds and planting. What do you use to plant tiny seeds like carrots?
Well, we have a cedar, so we're cheating. No. So carrots used to take a very long time for us to seed in the beginning before we bought the cedar. Our cedar fits in our beds. It works really well. The best thing, so they do make handheld cedars. It's a little, I have one somewhere, but I've never had great luck with them, but basically they're like a little disc with a little spout on the end, and you can fill that with seed and just kind of tap them as you go. With carrots, sometimes you make a real shallow row and you can just take them and if you're just doing a small space, take less. I pinch less between my index finger and my thumb, and you just sprinkle a little more lightly. So if you take care to kind of just sprinkle lightly and roll the seed off your thumb and kind of see what that feels like, the more practice you get at it, the more precise you can get hand seeding. Those little hand seeders, I think if you just type in like vegetable seed hand seeder, you can give those a try. They're like $5 or $6, I think. And that can be helpful. But again, I think it's just a matter of maybe kind of paying attention, taking less seeds in your hand and just kind of practicing how quickly you move across, like when you're seeding something, if that makes sense.
Awesome. Thanks. Super helpful. And then, so this question is going to move on to germination. Does it matter if you cover your seeds close to the ground or if you use hoops?
As far as the row cover goes?
Yes, for when your seeds are germinating.
So you can go direct on the bed. And that might be a little easier in the beginning, if you don't have your hoops ready and stuff. The blanket, the advantage of the row cover is that it's not going to scald your seeds and it can still breathe in there and it can still get wet in there. So you can water right over that. So you can put that directly in contact with the soil. You just want to pay attention to that emergent state, because once they start to come up, you want to make sure that they're not getting squished, but they will grow. They'll grow with the row cover. It'll just be, you just want to pay attention to what's going on under there, but you can go direct soil to row cover. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks. And then, so I guess speaking of row cover, this one is more about covering things with plastic. So this person is wondering, can you transplant herbs or plants into a raised bed now and keep that raised bed covered with a plastic tent is the question, but curious if you have thoughts on transplanting that now and covering.
I think it's a little early personally, because I do think so. The one thing about transplants is that they're more fragile than direct seeding. So your setting out date, you got to kind of be aware that those little guys can freeze even if they are frost tolerant plants. That's kind of the challenge with transplants, which is sometimes why I think direct seeding is just as easy here, because you don't really have to worry about those little plants freezing. So to get back to answering that, I keep them inside a little bit. I mean, coming up, we're supposed to get 4 to 8 inches of snow tonight and a bit more tomorrow. So another thing, early season, keep an eye on the weather. It's looking like it's going to be wet through the rest of this month. I just don't think there's a rush in doing it if they're happy inside. Covering it with plastic right now, sure, that can help. But the challenge, again, if the plastic is touching the tips, the points of the plants, and it starts to snow, then the snow bearing load is going to go on your tiny little plants, and they're going to be carrying however much snow load is on those. Like that picture you just saw of those hoops in May, I had to go out and clean all that. It was a heavy wet snow. That's the other thing. It's not this light fluffy snow. So your hoops, you want to have them spaced at least 2 feet apart, not 4 feet apart. That's something else that you want to be closer to bear that snow load. And it's just kind of a precarious time of year. So I just wait till May. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks. And I'm going to give a quick shout out. The workshop Kyla did last year is posted on our website, and there's some really great information in there about setting up those hoops, about setting up your beds, placing your beds, how deep those beds should go. So if you haven't checked that out when this one is over, check out our website because we do have great resources from Kyla on there already. And then let's see, switching seasons to the heat of summer. Do you recommend shading spinach because of the intense heat during the day?
Yeah, but spinach, I'm going to get into a little more variety selection with spinach. It's really important to be selecting the appropriate varieties and the time of season that they like to mature. I have a chart at the end of the presentation. That's the biggest thing you can shop for, I feel, is like slow boat spinach. Unless you're ready to pull it and replant it and pull it and replant it, no matter how much shade it's in, it's still going to get hot and it's still going to bolt at least one point. But yes, shading it will help. But selecting the appropriate variety for when you're wanting it to be harvestable will also help a lot too.
Great. And then what about soaker hoses? Do you recommend soaker hoses over direct watering in a raised bed?
Soaker hoses are great. The same with a drip hose has been kind of where more the professional growers are going. They're similar, but I think drip tape is just easier to work with and it lasts longer. So the difference between drip tape and soaker hose is that drip tape is an actual like piece of plastic that's got holes in it to water your bed. You want to make sure the holes are up, not pointing down in the soil, but pointing up. A soaker hose, the whole thing gets wet and permeates. I feel like those dry out a lot easier. They're a little bit older technology. So I've maybe shot for some drip tape and maybe like the 8-inch spacing. There's a lot to look for in that. But if there's more questions on that, we can get into details. But yeah, absolutely. That can help you so much. You can put it on a timer. You'll just want to pay attention to how much you're watering. You don't need to water every day with if you're using drip tape or soaker hose. Sometimes I can get away with watering just once a week. So it's a deeper watering. You have less transpiration. You have less water loss through transpiration or transpiration. And yeah, it's a great way to set a timer if you're not home and just have it do it on its own. So I'd absolutely recommend it. When you're germinating, when you first seeded, you have to hand water. We hand water all our beds before they've germinated, and then we start our cycle of irrigating with our drip tape. So.
Awesome, thanks. We're gonna do one more question and then I think we'll move on. And we do have a question from Barbara about any recommendations for container gardening. And I will say before you answer that, we do have space at the Breckenridge Community Garden. So if container gardening is not a fit, get a community garden plot in Breckenridge. And in the meantime, any containers you'd recommend?
Container gardening is great. It can help add to your garden. I think for those of you that have, small community garden plots, things like, this is maybe a little bit off, but like if you have leftover tires or such, those are great to plant potatoes in. I think planting potatoes, if you don't have a lot of space in a separate small planter, are helpful. Those earth boxes can take on a lot of food in them, and they're really easy to bring inside and to cover. So I think earth boxes can be great if you have like a nice patio, it's sunny, and you can bring them in inside at night and you're like, oh, I'm going to try a pepper on my patio. Those kind of things are great. Again, when you're planting those, keep the spacing in mind. And that spacing guide is super helpful. I'm going to keep stressing it because I was actually really impressed with it. And that's why I've got it here. There's no need to recreate it. So just as long as you're if you're keeping enough space. So for example, if you've seen those earth boxes, you can fit maybe like 2 to probably like 3 pepper plants in it, or like, 1 to like 2 tomatoes in it or something. And those are helpful for, you can do greens in them too. Yeah, you can definitely, I just say, keep that spacing in mind.
Awesome. Thanks, Kyla. I know we do have some questions about pests. So if we have time at the end, maybe we can get into that a little bit. But for now, we're gonna keep it rolling with succession planting.
All right. Succession planting, the dubious task of the garden in Summit County. So basically, it's going to maximize your space. It's going to extend your harvest window. You'll be able to keep a continuous supply up, and you'll keep that quality and yield up. So back to bolting on that. Once your quality is gone, just replant it. You'll get something better out of it. So there's a few different strategies you can do. We use all the methods in our garden, and basically different crops planted in succession. So that's different things planted one after another. So you want radishes first, then you can plant salad turnips, and then maybe you're going to follow that up with arugula, and you'll plant those, when one crop's out, you'll follow it by another. Same crop in succession. That means you're going to empty a patch of radishes, you're going to replant it with radishes, or, you've got space in your garden to go radish, 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 or whatever that might be. And then different crops simultaneously, but with different maturation dates. That's kind of the carrot example. So let's move into some of these examples. So Start in the same crop every few weeks to stagger your harvest and increase your garden's output. So what I just kind of said, you can turn and burn things like the quickest things in your garden are going to be radishes, salad turnips, arugula, and other spicy greens. And you can typically get 2 to 3 plantings of, cut and come again baby leaf lettuce. I don't for production gardens, I don't recommend doing head lettuce. It's a lot more time and a lot less yield, a lot more chance for pests. The butter lettuce is great because you can't get it in the store a lot of the times, but just again, if we're focusing on production, go for the cut and come again greens. And then spinach, you'll probably get at least 2 to 3 plantings, depending on where you are. Same for bok choy. And so let's see here. I've got a couple different examples. So salad turnips don't bolt as quickly as radishes do. They're a great thing in the garden. It's something that I feel like anything on the internet never talks about salad turnips. I've got a picture of them here. Let's see where we're at. So here's an example of what we're doing here with succession planting. All right, so let's start with arugula. So arugula is delicious. We love it. People love to leave it in their garden all season long. Don't do that. If you're planting arugula, I mean, you can do that, do whatever you want, but we do 1 to 2 harvests max. I think in an outdoor garden, if you're, in Silverthorne and Breckenridge and Frisco and any of these immediate areas in Summit, you can get about 2 harvests, 1 to 2, see what it tastes like. Arugula does best if you turn and burn it. So after that second harvest, you're not going to want to pull it. It takes a real lot of bravery to pull that crop out. But by the 3rd harvest, it's going to be so spicy that you're not going to want to eat it. It's going to be, so there's a difference between spicy and bitter. It's going to be bitter. And you're not going to be able to salvage it and you're going to wonder what's going on. So with arugula, do to a 1 to 2 harvest max and then pull it. And you can experiment. One time I got 5 harvests out of it and it still tasted good. But at that point it was getting pests. It was starting to flower. You can eat flowers of, plants that are bolting. But again, just go back to your goals and what you want out of your garden. It's an easy crop to replant and you'll get a higher yield out of that first cut every time. So those are some planting dates that's specific from things that we use. And sometimes for arugula, I just have to pepper it in wherever it fits the best. But that's just to give you an idea. We planted arugula 6 times this last season and it was perfect and beautiful and tasted awesome every time we cut it. So that's just an idea of what you can do with arugula. And then I put these 3 up because these are the fastest crops. So radishes, we got 4 plantings out of that and you can see how we did that. So in here, I put the planting, this is the actual sow date, the date that we planted it. This is the date that we harvested it. And then, how many harvests we got out of each planting. And then this guide where I say sow to harvest, this is including germ time. So, most radishes are like a 25-day radish. So this I've added germ time. And then for my first plantings, I kind of give them an extra week in the springtime to allow for dark days, to allow for cold weather, to give them an extra week to grow because I need them to be shining stars for our first CSA share. So that's just kind of an idea of all those different planting dates. And this is a good guide to start with if you're wondering how to do it. Just piggyback off these dates. And that's why I kind of set this up so that you can see what that looks like and how much time it took us from the day that we seeded it till the day that we actually harvested it. So with the salad turnips, you can get a few more. They hold their quality. So field holding ability, when you read that about a crop, it holds really well in the field. They won't lose quality as quickly as radishes and arugula, for example. So you can keep them in the garden a little longer. So you can see from this later. So for us, those end of July planting dates, that's for crops that are going to be harvestable in the fall coming into the winter. So you can see The harvest dates there were through September and October, but I was able to get five harvests out of that third succession. So 3 S's, third succession, can't talk. So questions about that, shoot them out, but it should give you kind of a good example of what, you know, an evolving garden looks like with those fast crops. Like these are 3 top things that you can grow here. And, you know, you can throw mustards and spinach and lettuces in there too, kind of, but the lettuce will hold longer. And I've got an example of that here. So with lettuce, again, something that you're not going to read about often is people's capacity to grow lettuce. We have a huge advantage over most other regions of the world, or, you know, at least the States. Anyway, so the first planting of our lettuce, you can see here, I've got 12 rows times 30 feet, and you can scale this down. This is just, you know, directly kind of from what we've been doing at the CSA. So if you're direct seeding your lettuce on May 15th, you can expect a harvest by 6/25. I think I did that one a little earlier because I was coming out of May 2019, where everything took extremely long into like a super warm record season. So you can just kind of look at those dates as a guide and kind of see where you're at with that. So we harvested off this first lettuce patch every week for 5 weeks. And it held good quality the whole time. It still tasted good. And it had little problems with pests. So the next seeding I do, and this is again, in order to make it work for the CSA, so you can kind of play with that and see what you need for your own goals and your own dreams for your garden. So our second planting, I doubled the size of that patch, because by the second harvest, the yield off the first planting is going to be cut in half, more or less. And so in order to make that a continuous supply for our shareholders, I've doubled this so that it can act almost as 2 plantings. So I know it might be kind of confusing, but you can just kind of see how that went. So yield isn't so important as the timing of it right now. So with this second seeding, we were able to get 6 harvests off it for, 6 harvests off of it. So I didn't add in all those dates, but you can just do, that was weekly for 6 weeks. Most guides will tell you to plant it every week. We don't need to plant lettuce every week here. So then this is, again, just to show you what we've done here. And then my third planting, I went back down, I halved it because I knew I was going to have some overflow for my second planting. And then I needed to bump it up a bit with that third planting. So I direct seeded on July 14th. So that was 5 weeks later. So I did a 2-week interval and then a 5-week interval to bump me up through the fall. And that note 7.3 better, that was just something that I was a little late planting that. And at that point, if you look through the harvest dates, they're become every other week. So they're not growing as fast as the first 2 plantings. Those harvests in June and July, August, or June and July rather, were weekly. And then coming into the later sown succession, that harvest slows down to every other week. So that's kind of coming back to that question earlier. So we were harvesting every other week to get the patch as big as it was before. And then by the last week, it was down. We had to let 2 weeks pass before it was big enough to harvest again. So I think that should be kind of understandable, but again, shoot questions if you have them. Here's an example again from Johnny's website, and I'm pretty sure Lisa's sharing that. Here's a succession planting calendar that you can actually go in and modify yourself. And this is just an example, but this is just another way to view it. And some of this is excessive for our region. You're not gonna get multiple plantings of cucumbers or melons or summer squash. I mean, if you're hoping for that, then you might want to move to somewhere a little warmer. But you can kind of just get it as an idea of how that works for succession planting. So the final planting date. So as I said before, August 15th is a good guide. So the final planting date is the last date to plant and expect to still get a harvest if you're growing outside. And then the final date, that's going to fluctuate depending on your situation, if you have a greenhouse, if not. And then, you know, your crop growth, as that day length gets shorter, the weather gets colder, it's going to slow down. So I put this up here as something you can check out. For carrots, the last date I use is July 3. It could be later in your situation, but that's a good starting point. August 4th for bok choy and salad turnips, that's the last date I've been able to get a harvest. And for, you know, for my final harvest, it's second week of October. Yours might be later depending on your situation. And then August 15th, that's the absolute last date that I'm really going to plant anything, unless I'm trying to overwinter something, which never really happens. So I think that's a good little starting point guide for you. Oh, we might be running out of time here, but carrots, here's a quick example. If you want to go through this, the first planting, they were 60 to 70 days to maturity. I planted these at on the same day, May 5th, as my second succession carrots, which are 70 to 80 days to maturity. So as I start to run out of my 60 to 70 day ones, then my 70 to 80 day ones will be maturing. I've put some examples of specific varieties if you want to have a look at those. And then my third planting is on that 6/26 to 7/3 final planting date for my carrots. And again, I start back with my super fast matures, 60 to 70 on the carrots. And then in that same planting, I've added in those 70 to 75 day carrots, so that lasts a little longer. So I think you can kind of understand how that works. You can do the same thing with different crops that you notice, like broccoli rabe is a good example. And I was able to put in a quick arugula patch before my third succession of carrots. So this is you might want to just have a look at this on your own, but this is a quick turn and burn of that quick arugula, and then having those carrots last us through, that was 13 plus weeks of harvesting on those carrots. So later season plantings, you'll want more closely together, and you want to plant varieties that are adapted to mature in the cold. And then as far as spinach, here's that chart. Again, this is from Johnny's website, but just real quickly, go to the bolting section and growth rate section. Things that grow quickly, bolt quickly, as far as spinach is concerned. These are the things you want to plant in the fall. So this could be like your second planting, and they've got the guide for you here on the side. So you can see the sow harvest dates, and it'll tell you, you know, like, so what I do for everything I choose for my spinach, Corvair was a good variety for us. It's a medium growth rate, it's a slow bolt rate, and you can plant it all season. So that's something, these are guides that are there to help you. And it's just, so I'm trying to help you read this stuff. So again, with Lizard was a new one that we grew last year. It did fantastic. I've never seen spinach take so long to bolt ever. And it was a hot season. So slow growth rate, but even that for spinach means we're still harvesting off it weekly. Slow bolting. So with that one, you could harvest, you know, plant in the spring, harvest in the summer, into the fall. Like, that's the kind of things you want to look for. I would never select fast bolting unless I was growing like in the wintertime, or if I was like, I had a different program going. But I think for home gardeners, and I'm going to wrap up here, that's kind of what you can look for. So yeah.
Thanks, Kyla. So we do have one quick question about seeds, and then we'll see if we have time for a pest question. Do you recommend buying new seeds every year, or can you use seeds that are a few years old?
You can use seeds that are a few years old. I think we're in a dry, cool climate. Keep them dry, cold, or dry and cool. I just keep them in Ziploc bags in the shade. And you can get away with at least a few seasons. Things like cilantro and parsley, you might want to toss after like 5 years, but I keep mine. I mean, we've used up to 3 to 5 years. Some people would say like no more than 3 years, but yeah, you can reuse seed.
Awesome, thanks. And then, so the pest questions that we do had kind of vary from little guys on leaves to voles to larger things like deer. Is there any parting advice you can give the group for protecting their hard-earned yield from pests, large and small?
So row cover, there's a lightweight one. And again, we can maybe talk about that in a different time. But anyway, the light grade row cover works really well for insect protection. That's what we use for things like flea beetles, which are typical on radishes, salad turnips, and arugula, the brassicas. And we use it. I use row cover for all of my insect pest protection, and it works fantastic. So everything basically gets covered. And as far as voles, you got to stay on them early and often. Think about Home Alone, Macaulay Culkin, when he was with us, you know, the burglars. You just got to keep outsmarting them and think of new things. I think we've gone over that a lot, and I think we've got resources available. But you can't just let them do what they want. I mean, if they're attacking your stuff, you got to do something about it. You know, traps, predator urine is great. There's a lot of repellents out there. You just want to mix it up. You got to be like every 2 weeks, you got to keep doing something different. So it's just early and often is what I like to say. And you got to keep outsmarting them. Yeah. And you can just Google that. There's a number of ways. I wouldn't use poison.
Awesome. Definitely no poison. Awesome. So thanks so much, Kyla. I think we are gonna wrap it up here shortly. So be realistic, be brave. Any other final words as we get to planning our gardens for the summer of 2021?
Yeah, just take a minute to read about what you're growing and what you're putting in the ground, and get to know your crop a bit. And then pay attention to the weather, and good luck.
Awesome. I'll take all the luck I can get. And perhaps you all will too. So thank you guys. First of all, thanks so much to Kyla for offering her expertise and time today. We so appreciate it. Every time, you know, I'm in one of these things, I learn so much, and we so appreciate you both as the leader of the CSA and Grow to Share programs, and as an educator in our community. So as a reminder, we do have plots available in Breckenridge, highcountryconservation.org for all the resources you heard about today. We'll be posting everything, I would say, by tomorrow. With an email going out by end of day tomorrow. And also too, now that you guys are all basically experts, I'm sure you're going to be harvesting a lot more food this summer. So don't let those extras go to waste. We work with Summit County WIC and the FERC to donate fresh produce to families in need. We also teach folks how to prepare and store all different kinds of fresh produce. So that's called Grow to Share. We're going to include some of that info in the follow-up email. So thank you again to all of you, to all of our supporters, and to Kyla. Happy gardening, guys.
Thanks, guys. Happy gardening.